Hi, it's Marjorie O'Toole from the Little Compton Historical Society, and today I wanted to talk to you about one of the brand new items that's just been donated to our collection. One of the really fun things about working here is that every once in a while, and maybe more often than you might think, families with a connection to Little Compton are still donating really amazing items um, that are beautiful, have great historic value, and we're honored to add them to our collection and preserve them for future generations. So this week, this beautiful sampler arrived. This is a very recent gift of Betsy Wilson, who descends from the Thorndike family of Taylor's Lane. So the Thorndikes, Annette and her husband Ashley, came to Little Compton, came to Sakonnet in 1926, and in 1930 they built their own house on Taylor's Lane, along with the guest house that they called the Dinghy. In that they built their house in 1930. In 1939, their daughter, Marian Thorndike Hibbitt, made this cross-stitch sampler for her mother, Annette. So Marian made the sampler for Annette. And what's interesting, they kept notes of all the symbols in the sampler, and we can enjoy their meaning and their interpretation today.
So let's take a close look at some of the detail in the sampler. Up here in the corner, we have a representation of the hurricane of 1938 blowing down the steeple of the Congregational Church. Across the top, we have the Newport Bridge, which was brand new at the time, and underneath we have geese flying, because at the time, people believed that the word Sakonnet meant the haunts of the wild goose, or where the wild geese gather. Because the Wampanoag language is being relearned, rediscovered by Wampanoag people and Wampanoag speakers, we know that that is probably not the true meaning of the word, and it probably means something more like the place that juts out. In this corner, we have a helmeted soldier, because in 1939 the world was at war, and the Newport Customs House. Taking a day trip to Newport was a very popular pastime for people who were summering in Little Compton. So this would have been something the Thorndike family might have visited every year. On this side of the family, we have John and Priscilla Alden and their little girl Betty Alden, who is believed to be the first white girl born in New England. Betty came to Little Compton as an adult and lived with her family across the street from the Wilbur House. The Sakonnet Lighthouse, Mrs. Thorndike's motor car, which according to the notes that came with the sampler, driving in her car was one of her favorite pastimes. This little building is called the Dinghy, and it was the guest house for the Thorndikes' larger home built on Taylor's Lane. And their house is represented here with the garages for the motor car. We have the Fall River boat, which was overnight from New York City to Newport and Fall River. And from Fall River, visitors could take a train down to Tiverton for quite a while, or catch public transportation to Tiverton, and later even to Little Compton on something called the Massey bus. On this, and we'll come back up to the top, we have a soup tureen of fish chowder. We have the Rhode Island red hen, bridge cards. Bridge was a very popular pastime for summer visitors. Ice cream cones, swordfish, which was a pastime for sport fishermen at Sakonnet Point. I love this notation. They have a candle because they say they lost their power so frequently. Just this week, many of us in Little Compton lost our power due to a windstorm. Deer, and they noted deer in the past and deer in the future. Boiled lobster, tennis racket. And on this side of the sampler, we have Johnny cakes with maple syrup, a ship from the America's Cup, a sailboat from the America's Cup. Benjamin Church, Awashunks, and members of the Sakonnet tribe. The train from New York to Providence. Rum runners bottles. The Thorndikes note that rum running bottles or alcohol bottles would wash up at the end of Taylor's Lane on the beach at the end of the lane. Marian Thorndike's watering can, gardening was one of her pastimes, and in fact, she was a trained professional landscape architect. Marian noted the cow that got loose in the Thorndike's fields, as well as the windmill on Windmill Hill. And it was news to me that there was still a windmill in Little Compton in 1939. This represents Adamsville cheese. Manchester's store in Adamsville had a whole special process for aging cheese in their basement, and it was supposed to be delicious and highly desired by local residents. She included an elephant because she noted that most of the people in Little Compton were Republicans at the time. And then also the 18th hole from the Sakonnet Golf Club, as well as a whaling ship. Now across the bottom, there are special notes about Mrs. Thorndike's helpers. And first is a stonemason, followed by a hay cutter, and then a question mark. So the person writing these notes may not have been, well, certainly wasn't Mrs. Thorndike, or perhaps even the maker of the sampler. The notes might have come a little bit after the making of the sampler by someone who didn't know the story as well as the Thorndikes did themselves. The laundryman, and Mary at the well. So we looked up the Thorndikes in the 1930 census in New York City and found that they had a cook named Mary Garriest. Mary was a young African-American woman. And we can only imagine how different it was for Mary to cook in a simple kitchen in a Little Compton summer home and draw water at the well compared to working in a lovely home in New York City. On the other side, they noted the grass cutter, the plumber, the carpenter, a question mark for someone wearing a uniform and carrying a tool, and then finally Johnny Pierce carrying an inner tube. Johnny Pierce owned a gas station and would have been important to the Thorndikes, especially if Mrs. Thorndike loved her car. In the center, we've got a compass and the maker's initials. And again, one of the most notable things is this scar through the letter T to symbolize the gallstone operation that she had that slowed down her work on the sampler. But we hope you enjoyed this discussion of the newest addition to the Little Compton Historical Society's collection. And we hope it makes you think about the things that your family may treasure that may someday find a welcoming and permanent home in the collection of the Little Compton Historical Society.